Hi, everybody. Welcome to We Didn't Turn Out Okay. Today, I'm with dear friend, Ali Bandier. She's a child and family dietitian, and she has now founded Senta Health, which she'll tell you a little bit about. Ali and I have worked together since COVID 2020, supporting moms through all of her knowledge, new moms, not new moms, just all moms with their kids. And we've had a lot of fun in our aligned philosophies, and we're excited to be here and talk further. So, Ali, can you tell everybody a little bit more about you?
Thanks for having me. And actually, I don't know if you remember, we met because I was a mom in your mom group.
Oh, yes. I always forget that.
Which was such a great experience for me because it was COVID and there were no mom gatherings. So you were doing them online, which was incredible.
Oh my God, it was the highlight of my day every day during that time that I would get to hang out with groups of moms. Yes, I forgot that's how we met. Yeah.
So you asked about my background, about Senta Health. I've been in the nutrition space for 12 years now. I got my master's at Columbia University in nutrition. Then I became a registered dietitian. For me, I knew I wanted to specialize in pediatrics. So when I did my training, I really wanted to work at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. I actually moved across the country from New York to work there specifically. I felt that if I was going to work with children, I wanted to get this intense hospital training. So when I was there, I worked in something called feeding clinic when I was being trained. And I worked with pediatricians, dietitians, speech therapists, occupational therapists, psychologists. We worked on a team to combat very severe eating issues in kids. I remember one specific case where a child only ate Tostitos chips, and we were even able to help him. So all of that training led me back to New York. I opened up my private practice, Senta Health. I've been seeing kids and families with Senta Health for 5 years now privately, and I see kids 0 to 10 years old.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm so glad that you told everyone about that specific part of your background at Feeding Clinic. I feel like every time I've introduced you, because you've continued to support us with moms at Union Square Play or just in various ways when I've recommended you, I'm like, oh, no, and she has done all this work at Feeding Clinic. I find it to be so interesting and so incredible that you were able to see the success cases with the most severe kind of picky eater, just the whole range. But, you're able to add calm, I feel, to parents' situations when they come to you feeling like it's so dire, saying my kid will only eat X or Y or will never eat something else. And you give hope because you've seen it.
I mean, it's taught me that change is always possible.
Right.
But also given me the perspective that I try to intervene beforehand in a prevention type way, because the things you're doing to improve the outcomes, if you start doing them with babies with their first bite of food, you could prevent a lot of these or try to prevent a lot of these issues down the line.
And when we met, you were a new mom.
Yes.
I mean, you had an infant. And so I was always interested to see how you would bring this into your own parenting. So I'm excited for us to talk a little bit about that too. And just the realness of it, and also just what you've prioritized and felt, are non-negotiables. Laughing because we have some funny stories about that. But I think we can dive in and start with kind of these areas where we really have connected and we've even created some content around it based on what we've seen a lot of parents do, many of them, myself included, but that I've realized with you and kind of alongside you, there are better ways. One being inspired by, grandparents, I think, in my case, when we attach our emotions to our kids eating. So an example is, my mom or my Israeli grandma would be like, it would make me so happy if you ate all your food. And, the kind of slippery slope there of why that's not a good idea, and then how we can stop ourselves in other ways. So even something like, I worked so hard on your meal, that's sort of attaching our emotion. Or, there's other people out there who don't have this food. Those are all we're targeting emotions, ours or other people's, with the amount our kids eat. Can you like speak a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. These things are so common. So, of course, if you've said them, don't worry. Everybody has said them and experienced it in their own home. But when I think about how kids eat, the first thing that I always tell parents is that every kid has a different starting point. So a child might be having sensory stimulation that another child won't be having, and that can make certain foods difficult to eat. Another child might have oral or motor strength coordination challenges that make food difficult to eat. It could be something as simple as a super high energy personality, making it hard to sit at the table for long periods of time. So always want to preface like these conversations with, don't compare one child to another child, even within the same home, because everybody has this different starting point. But with that said, there are things that parents could do and feel empowered that what we can do and what we could do in a situation or what we cannot do in a situation could make it go in one direction or another direction, more positive direction. And this is shown, in our own homes, but also in the research. And with what you're saying about tying these emotions to food, this is a form of indirect pressure. So it would make me so happy if you ate that. You're trying to get your child to eat that food, right? Like that's the reason for saying that. And time again in the research, pressure has been linked to poor eating outcomes, not only in childhood, but in adulthood. So if you remember anything from this conversation, remember that pressure backfires in the long run. So it is linked to refusal in the short term, but in childhood pressure, when kids are adults, it's linked to lower intuitive eating and higher rates of disordered eating. So, but in the short term where you're sitting there and you're trying to get your child to like eat this piece of broccoli and you're saying, oh, just have one more bite of this broccoli, and you get them to have that one more bite of broccoli. But what's the point of that?
Right.
It's not changing their health and nutrition to get that one bite.
It's for us that we're asking them to do it.
It's for us.
I mean, we might think it's, because I want them to get those nutrients, but really it's for us to feel okay.
Exactly. And that one bite of broccoli, the nutrients in that one bite is not changing them. And when they sit down to that next meal, they're not going to voluntarily eat the broccoli. In fact, I mean, you experience this every day with the parents you work with, but as kids get older, they're developmentally supposed to assert themselves. So toddlers, preschoolers, they're supposed to exert their independence, and often this comes out in food. Because if they said, I don't want to go to school, you would make them go to school. But you can't make them eat. And having this pressure to make them eat often results, like we've been saying, in the opposite scenario.
There's no real positive. Yeah. And it's funny you say that with you can't force them to eat, and it's a way that they assert themselves. And that is also an area that is so triggering for all humans, I think. I think food and feeling good about our parenting, there's so much wrapped up into it. But I early on realized the surrendering I had to do with eating. I mean, we've talked a little bit about it when we met, that my girls didn't, do well with solids at first. That like
they had reflux, right?
Reflux, but also starting solids. They hated, the pureed foods. And I was always told, food before one. But I was like, yeah, but there's literally no food intake.
Right.
They just hated food, and I had to surrender. I mean, we figured out that they wanted independence. They wanted to be able to pick up their foods. I wasn't fully comfortable with baby-led weaning, so I found this like in between of, like mushy muffins, things like that. But the whole point was that, you can't open their mouth and put food in. Like, so they're going to assert themselves in an area that they have full and should have full control over. So you might see that even later on, not just when they're starting solids, attached to their own like kind of struggles too, right? Like when they're in a new setting or at school, they might not eat as much. And it's just an area that they're able to control. And it's sometimes like what they're going through can manifest in that way. But do you feel like that's something to worry about? Like if we're thinking about emotions tied to eating habits, that like when a child is going through a transition or, not as, maybe there's a new sibling and their eating kind of is off. Is that something to worry about?
there's so little things that our young children can control in their lives. Like they have to go to school, they have to wear clothes when they go to school, maybe not a jacket outside if they refuse, but they have to wear a shirt. There's very little that they can control. So oftentimes when there is a big change, it does manifest at the dinner table. And even for me, so I have a almost 5-year-old son, Pierce, who we started doing the mom group together with. And then now I have a 14-month-old daughter, Geneva. And when Geneva started eating food around 5-6 months, my son at first was really excited about it. He wanted to be around. He wanted to be super involved. But as she got older, and I try to eat dinner with them every night as much as I can, that's like something important to me. And he would watch me paying attention to her, making sure she's not choking or making sure the food is in, the proper size and format for her. And he would react to that. So he would climb under the table. He would run around the table, things that he would never normally do before she was present because he wanted my attention. Another thing, I could make a throwaway comment, oh, Geneva loves cauliflower. That's her favorite food. He stopped eating cauliflower for a couple of months, not just like a few days, a couple of months. And he would say, that's for Geneva. That's not for me. So it's not about the food. He didn't wake up and decide that he hated cauliflower. Right. It's a reaction to a change in the environment. And that goes back to the pressure. If I had sat there saying, you need to eat the cauliflower, he would dig his heels in more.
Right.
So I instead tried to create moments of connection with him separate from Geneva, outside the table. When we're at the table together, I made sure to focus on him, ask him more questions. But it's a balancing act. Like you can't get it right every time, but trying to pay attention to why something's happening at the table, usually it's not about the food.
Right. And that's why it's not as simple as one more bite or...
Right.
I have a really big... that's so interesting about Pierce and makes so much sense that... And instead of being like, you love cauliflower, eat it, and then having, I think there's something there, though, before we move on, to call out something like, I think you might have heard me say that Geneva likes cauliflower. What do you think about that, or do you still like it? And taking it if he's like, no, that's for Geneva. But I just think sometimes they don't realize what they're processing. It just comes out in a behavior. And then we often take that behavior at face value and miss the whole thing. And sometimes it's just like helping them realize what might be behind it. So even saying something like, I think you heard me say Geneva likes a food that you love too.
Right.
What do you think about that?
Right.
It might even allow him to process it differently. Like, oh, we can both like the same food. And I don't have to give that to her in order for me to grapple with that. But something that I struggle with that we've actually done some content around is putting some food on a pedestal. And I try so hard. I've even said, I might put an M&M on their dinner plate, not making treats and desserts like this special thing or something to eat their meal for. But something I struggle with that I know a lot of people will relate to is I just finished my dinner. Can I have dessert? And how to respond to that, or I'm full, I don't want my dinner, but then ask for dessert. The whole dessert thing I also don't like, that it's even called something else. I just want it all to be on the same plane because I know how, dicey that can be. And then just this week was the first time I really stood my ground with it. Nell really didn't eat even a morsel of dinner, which sometimes okay, you're tired.
That happens.
But then she, before bed, is I want dessert. I'm I'm sorry, you weren't hungry for dinner and it's too late now, and she went to bed, but she was annoyed. And in my mind, I was did she feel like I punished her for not eating? And so I need all the Ali thoughts on this.
Sure. So going back to the first thing you said, the cookie if you eat something, the reward of dessert if you do eat something. So in my approach to food with kids, I try to keep food neutral. Kids know that cookies taste better than broccoli, right? I think a cookie tastes better than broccoli too. But if we give them that added special aspect to the cookie, so if you eat your broccoli, you get a cookie, it makes the cookie even more special. Tastes better already, and now it's even more special. But actually what I try to avoid in this situation is the fact that it's lowering the broccoli, lowering the vegetable.
I was just going to say, it makes the broccoli like, I'm not going to eat that unless I'm going to get a cookie.
Right. It makes it so icky. The vegetable is so icky that I can't eat it unless I get a prize for eating it. So I definitely try to avoid that because it creates something better, something worse. But to your point about dessert, I do believe that kids should be partaking in all various types of food. Of course, I think the majority of their diet should be healthy, but I really am working on trying to get kids to have a happy relationship with all types of food. So when they're adults, when they're mothers and fathers, they can feel that they could have a cookie and it's not ruining the day. And they're not bad for eating a cookie, and they could eat till they're full and stop when they're full. So when I think about dessert and like the example you gave, which is great, what I tell families and what I do in my own family is that I allocate certain days for dessert. So, for example, if it was a Tuesday in your family, you decide how many days you're comfortable with dessert. Some families, it's once every 2 weeks. Some families, it's every night. It's really a personal choice. But let's say Tuesdays are a dessert day for your family. So no matter what your child ate or didn't eat for dinner, that's a day that they...
And what if they decide on those days that they are going to not really eat dinner? It's okay.
It's okay. I mean, that's the day. So it's not tied to something.
But that's why it's risky, I guess, for it to be every day, though.
So I don't usually recommend it to be every day, but some kids actually can do that. They can eat their dinner every day, and then they can have, dessert could be frozen grapes. It doesn't have to be ice cream.
I should caveat that's like our situation. It's not always, but it's something like sweeter.
Right. But you also have to, going back to every child's different, figure out what is working for your child. So like for me, specifically with my family, because there are so many birthday parties, school events, things like that, my son ends up having cake or pizza or something at least once a week, and he knows that that's the day that we're having it that week. So like today he's having cake because it's a birthday, and he's having cake this afternoon, and he's happy. And I see him not even eating the whole piece because he's used to having cake. It's nothing that's so exciting.
Right. He doesn't feel like he's deprived of that or it's like restricted. Yeah, and I think that my kids are at the age, they're 5 and 7, so not all kids can have conversations like this. But if I did say to them, we can have dessert every night if we also are eating our dinner. But if we're finding that that's hard to do, let's pick a few nights, Right. But I just then worry that then they'll just, you know what I mean? It's so hard. I have a rule follower child, my 7-year-old. And like you were saying, you want your clients and their kids to be happy eaters. And I feel like if she hears or knows there's anything that's like not so amazing about a food, she feels like,
bad about it.
Right.
Bad about herself for eating it.
Yeah. Like I'll hear that narrative sometimes like, I'm not going to have this because I know I'm going to have, cake at the birthday party. And it's like, that's actually okay to think, but I don't want her to feel like, guilt about how, do you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you feel, especially at the older ages when you run into stuff like that?
I try to frame it more as how does that food make you feel? So instead of saying, I've had my well-intentioned mother, my children's grandmother at the house saying, oh, I don't want to have any cake because I'm watching my weight.
Right.
Right. So, of course, that's not something I want my children to hear. If she doesn't want cake, that's fine. She could say, oh, I don't really like the way it tastes, or I don't like the way it makes my body feel.
Right. Instead, she's like, because it's bad for you.
It's bad for you, or...
is that okay?
I prefer at a young age. So it depends on the age of a child, right? Like when you have an older child, when you have a teenage, middle school child,
you can
it's
talk
different.
about
But when I'm talking about like young children, it's hard for them to understand the nuances between these things.
Right.
So I much prefer to say, like, even for Halloween, like, how do you feel when you eat 10 pieces of candy?
Right.
Like, did you have a stomach ache? Did you not feel well? Maybe next year we should eat a little bit less, or things like that. Like if you go to a birthday party and you eat too much cake, how do you feel?
And like reframing that. If I hear her say that, saying like, oh, I think you're thinking about if you have ice cream now and then you go to that birthday party, that might not make you feel great.
Exactly. So it's not that she's bad for wanting it, but it's just about how do you feel when you have it.
Okay. And then I want to get into a little bit about like how we intervene or when we intervene or assert ourselves when it comes to outside the home. You know, like I recently, when I picked up Nell a week ago or so, they were like, can you guys pack less options? There's so many options. And mind you, Matt packs like just like 10 different things. Some of it has been candy. We've gotten in trouble. Like he just like throws it all in there. And he's usually the one that makes lunch. And I noticed that, you know, when she has a lot of options, that's not great. But what I don't love is what they said next. They're like, you know, it's just, we feel she's like sad when, you know, she's the last one and, you know, everyone else is finished. And when I've packed her lunches before, she's like nervous about too much. She'll want like 2 apple slices and like just very meager. And I've realized that it sort of has become this like competition or like all fun and games. Like, I wonder who could finish first. I'm sure that's how it's positioned. But when you have kids feeling like they have to eat their whole lunch, and that's not how I position any meal, I just am concerned about it now, thinking about that. Do you feel like that warrants like saying something like, can you guys not make it a contest of who finishes first?
I think it's always a important exercise to figure out when we're going to intervene and when we're not going to intervene at school and in life outside the home. The home is the most important and influential environment for children's eating habits. This is shown over and over again in the research. So the good news is what you're doing at home trumps most other things. But in that scenario you just described, what's happening is that they're having the kids override their hunger or fullness cues, which over time is eroding their innate ability to regulate themselves.
Right.
And it's also creating anxiety and pressure to like finish quickly. So perhaps that's a situation where you do want to intervene. For me, like I've had different situations at school, a school that I love and teachers that I love, where I've chosen not to intervene and chosen to intervene. I could share 2 examples with you. So recently, my son baked Valentine's Day cupcakes with the class. I thought this was wonderful, right? They did all the cooking in the class together. They ate the cupcakes together. Were the cupcakes healthier cupcakes? No, of course not. You know, were they filled with sugar? Could you have a healthier cupcake swap? Of course. But for me, that experience of cooking with his friends and then sharing that same food that they cooked and, you know, does it taste good? Should we have done something different? That is a social experience, and food is also social. And these small moments are not making a big impact on his health. And I want him to like share in that. So no, that's not something I personally am going to intervene in.
It wasn't worth it to you to be like, can you guys use this recipe instead?
Exactly. Or can you swap his cupcake for this low sugar cupcake that I made at home, right? Like I wasn't going to intervene there. But there was another scenario where it felt higher stakes to me. And I said, I need to intervene here. So we got an email last year at my son's school where we bring lunch to school. And the teacher, who we love, wrote this email saying that we weren't allowed to bring the hard-shelled bento box lunch boxes anymore. And if listeners don't know, you know, they have containers so food doesn't get soggy and food doesn't get smushed. And they wanted us to bring soft lunch boxes so that they could squish them inside the fridge so that they could fit more lunch and it was faster. But that meant that everything inside the lunchbox had to be in like a Ziploc bag or a squishy, a silicone bag, something that could be smushed, prepackaged, or you could put it in a Ziploc. But if you're packing whole foods for lunch, like a piece of salmon in a Ziploc bag, smushed in a refrigerator is not going to be appetizing.
Yeah, or like meatballs.
Or vegetables. It's not going to be appetizing. So I like mustered up the courage to write an email back to the teachers, very polite but firm, explaining why I didn't think it made sense and why I was still going to use a bento box, to pack these whole foods, and how hard I worked to get my son to be eating these foods. And I didn't want, this daily meal to like start impacting his eating. And they also wanted us to use plastic utensils that they could throw away, which I also didn't want to use for health and the environment. So I send this email, and I realized that I had replied all by accident to every single mother, father in the class, all of the school administration, including the head of the school. So I was completely mortified. I started spiraling. Oh my God, as women do, they're going to think I'm difficult and crazy, and I can't believe it. Yeah, the parents are going to think I'm nuts, which I'm sure some of them did. But I did.
No, I feel like it probably informed them of stuff that maybe they didn't know. And I hope made them feel like, oh, we should be assertive about this.
I did get text messages from most of the mothers and some of the fathers saying that they were also going to keep using a bento box. The whole incident was named Bento Gate. And anyway, we continued to use it. But to me, that was a situation that I wanted to intervene in, not publicly, but anyway.
It ended up being
publicly.
Yeah. And I think that's a testament to the cupcakes were fine, but the bento box, which was going to be this everyday thing, wasn't worth it to you to unravel the stuff that you've instilled in him regarding eating. And I think I should say something because this is an everyday thing for Nell in eating. And yeah, I'm sure it's already ingrained in them that it's going to be a competition and whoever finishes first. But I think that they can pull back and even say things to the kids we eat until we're full and you have this much amount of time and it's not a contest. I think they can start saying things like that. And, and I know it's hard. There's a small amount of time that they're able to eat. Kids are talking. But I think that's part of social stuff too to learn.
Exactly.
Eating in a group, that it's not always going to just be them and the parent and focusing solely on the food. And that's something that they're going to need to learn.
Especially as they get older and have to make their own food choices and manage their time more than just having the teacher say this is the time you have.
Yes.
But I agree, a daily thing that is over and over again.
Right.
Most of the time I've realize if you explain something, everybody is well-intentioned, and I think that maybe people don't realize the consequences of something.
I think that too. I think they're all talking. It's hard to manage so many kids, and they're let's see who can focus on their eating. I'm sure it's all well-intentioned, but then my child has this anxiety and will let us put one pretzel in her lunchbox.
One slice of apple.
And I'm wait, you love eating. Why are you? She's saying no snack, just...
Right, and every child will react differently to that. So again, different starting points, different temperaments. It reminds me of the Clean Plate Club. When I was little.
Oh my God, yeah.
I never was part of the Clean Plate Club.
Me neither. My parents would be the food's growing in your plate. And they meant it in a funny way, but I always felt bad about it.
I was are you going to send my food somewhere? I'm very anxious now at the table.
Yeah, and it can cause that. Yeah. And then here Matt is literally putting millions of choices. Wait, so that I feel was so interesting that you experienced something like that with the bento box. Can you give us a little bit of real, mom struggles that you might have that you didn't expect to have, especially being sort of an expert in this part of, parenting?
I think the thing that I'm experiencing for the first time, which I touched on before, is in my practice, I've worked, of course, with these sibling dynamics, but now I'm experiencing it firsthand. And I have two kids with complete opposite personalities, which I need your advice on, not just about food, but just in my household. They're polar opposites, and how that is just affecting their interactions with each other, with me, with playing, with eating.
Right. The temperaments are clashing a little bit sometimes, maybe.
They're just different. They're different. So like I mentioned at the table, my son is trying to get my attention at the table, and my daughter is very a big personality. So if he's eating something that she wants, she's lunging out of her high chair trying to get it. And the only reason she wouldn't also have it, because we were eating the same foods, is that maybe it's not safe for her yet.
Right.
Maybe he's eating something that it's like a little too advanced for her. This is, a little bit prior. Now she's old enough, but lunging out of her chair.
And then like how would he react to that?
Very upset, because he
Right.
would never like lunge at her, because that's not his personality.
Right. And so it feels sort of like, like almost violated. Like I
Yes.
would never,
I
And
would
they're
never do
expressing
that.
themselves so differently.
Right.
I've talked a little bit about this before, that when you are dealing with siblings, it's not just the transition that you experience when you first bring them home. A lot of times people are like, oh my God, he or she was so happy. And now, a year later, and like they are just always fighting or struggling and making each other upset. And it's a transition each time the baby reaches a new milestone. So I think in that situation, it's not just that now she's eating some of the same foods, but she's also able to assert herself and, be a little bit more physical and sort of not even like be his match. She's still so much younger. But as an infant that wasn't mobile, she couldn't lunge at him.
Right.
And so that might come with him like cowering under the table or just like behaviorally, not acting out, but just reacting to that. And I think saying something in those moments, even like, I saw Geneva, went to grab that from you and she shouldn't eat that. And you got nervous or whatever, trying to narrate it a little bit. I'm not in the moment to do it.
Would
more
you do that in the moment, or would you do it like in
But
a
trying
calm
to stay
moment?
neutral. Like in the moment.
In the
I
moment.
think, like, of course, if it's chaos, no. But if he went under the table and you're just like, I don't know what to do now, I think you can like kneel down to him and just say, Pierce, I saw Geneva. I don't know if he would understand the lunging, jumped at you.
Right.
I maybe you got scared by that. I think she really wants to try the food that you're eating. And you can look at her too. You're not like talking about her.
Right.
Geneva, did you really want to try that? And then it becomes like a connection moment between everybody. She doesn't exactly understand everything that's being said, but he does. And he feels seen and sort of like, oh, mommy's helping me like figure out why I just did that.
Right.
He might not even like know necessarily. The narrating sort of as neutral as you can really helps with that. Some people think it's like robotic, and I'm not saying to say it in a robotic voice.
I think that's really...
We usually come to it with like emotion
I think that's
and like
helpful.
charged. Yeah.
I'm thinking also like in a play environment where he is playing with something and he's been an only child for so many years.
Yeah.
And he's not used to somebody just grabbing things out of his hands.
Yeah.
'Cause he doesn't grab out of her hands.
Right.
And
Yeah,
that I would narrate
it
that.
sounds
then,
like
I
he
guess.
also probably gets like disappointed. Like, why would she do that? And you can even say, Geneva's learning. Geneva, you're learning how to play next to Pierce. And I think that's like a tool that you could utilize for a while, even as she gets older. You're not talking about her negatively. You're sort of like narrating the situation and helping her also understand why things might upset him. And it sort of is like bringing curiosity and awareness to the sibling dynamic instead of us just taking everything at face value, which we then miss the whole thing, right? Like, Geneva, sit down. That's Pierce's food. Pierce, get out from under the table. You're not supposed to do that. Like, we've just missed everything that this is really about.
Exactly. Like, it's not about anything about the food. It's not about wanting to be under the table.
Right. It's like such like the manifestation of like everyone just reaching these new like developments, her starting to eat the same foods, being able to move, him processing that he now has a sibling that's not just like a blob that sleeps.
Right. It was easier for him when she was more of a blob, and then when she started crawling, he wasn't thrilled. Wasn't thrilled.
And like that will happen with each new transition, like walking, talking, and we have to kind of, I feel like, preemptively anticipate that sometimes, not to talk about it with them, but just to know, I'll always remember like Nell took her first steps and Tess felt so jealous and would be like, I can walk too. And I feel like then I started to, when we would show off the first steps to other people, be like, Tessie, should we ask Nellie to walk to Popsy? I sort of like included her. I realized that she needed to kind of be part of that. And understand that, you know, it didn't mean that like no one wanted to see her doing X, Y, and Z, but just Nellie's walking for the first, you know, just kind of, again, narrating that they're at different developmental stages and why us paying attention to one child in a moment doesn't mean we don't love the other child. We have so many, I feel like we just scratched the surface and we have so many other things to talk about. I am just glad that we were able to learn about just your overall approach and philosophy when it comes to food and answer a little bit about what you as a real mom struggle with, both with the school bento gate and also with sibling dynamics. But I always recommend you. Can you tell people where they could find you?
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I always love talking with you. I know we're doing a mom group together next week, which I'm excited about.
Me too.
So you could find me at sentahealth.com or on Instagram at Ali Bandier.
Great. Thank you so much, Ali. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.